and I may from time to time admit people from the lobby. All right. So welcome to our latest word for word session. And I'm extremely pleased, or not word for word, good grief, this is a Wireside chat. Anyway, welcome, and I'm extremely pleased to welcome our guest tonight, Benjamin Nugent, who is the director of the MFA Low-Residency Mountainview program at SNHU. Welcome, Ben.
Hey, thanks, Paul.
Yeah,
thanks for having me.
Yeah, it's my pleasure. Have really been looking forward to chatting with you. It's a bit of an irony or oddity, perhaps, that both of us work for Southern New Hampshire University and yet live not that far apart in Brooklyn, New York.
Yeah, it is an oddity, and it isn't given our profession.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah,
right.
Yeah. Yeah, they're all of the writers in the Eastern Seaboard, not all of them, many of them seem to be clustered into 2 or 3 neighborhoods right around here.
It's true. Not that you have to live in Brooklyn to succeed as a writer, I don't think by any means, but it doesn't hurt.
Yeah, it doesn't hurt. It's kind of good to catch the competition out of the corner of your eye as they bicycle past on their way to the supermarket. Yeah, you know, it's I mean, New England is obviously a place full of writers too, but it's you know, Brooklyn is close enough to Manhattan where the big publishing houses and the agencies are, and yet far away enough so that you know you can forget they exist when you want to.
Exactly. I came to New York in the early 80s. And that was what drew me, was the proximity to the publishing world. And I kind of became a kind of a lowly hanger-on in that world by working for magazines as a slush pile reader and stuff like that. What about you? What brought you to Brooklyn?
Yeah, you know, what brought me to Brooklyn was a desire to be a writer and meet other writers and write for magazines and be part of the New York world in general. And I moved here when I was 21, right out of college, and kind of didn't really know what to expect. Like, I think it wasn't like I really knew what happened in New York. I just kind of knew that you were supposed to move there, maybe.
Right.
So, you know, yeah, I kind of figured it out as I went. Yeah.
I don't know if that is quite true anymore. That you know, everything is so much more dispersed now. Everything is taking place online anyway. Self-publishing has become far more of a viable pathway, I guess, to you know, a successful literary career.
It certainly seems that yeah, for younger generations, the literary world happens as much on Twitter as it does in New York City, or in MFA programs as much as in New York City. Whereas when I was 21 in 1999, you know, MFA programs were still a little more marginal, and magazine writing was kind of a fashionable way to make a living. Magazines were doing really well at that time, and so yeah, New York was much more of an obvious choice than it would be now.
And you have written for a number of prestigious magazines and journals. I mean, you had and for all I know, still do have a career as a successful journalist and periodical writer. Is that something you still pursue?
Yeah, I still do it. You know, most recently for Harper's and Travel and Leisure, but yeah, here and there. I don't just write fiction. I still write journalism sometimes. Yeah, good to keep one's hand in it. And I still have nonfiction students sometimes. So.
Right. But do you see yourself primarily as a novelist now?
As a short story writer, actually. Yeah, that's what
I know. You've published 2 collections of short stories, I believe, and 1 novel.
1 collection of short stories.
Oh, okay. Oops, sorry.
But it's my only book that I like. It's the only book that anyone should ever read.
And what is the title of that book for those?
For those who might not know, Fraternity. thank you for letting me plug it.
Oh, for
It's a
sure.
short story collection that came out a couple of years ago and came out last year in paperback, and it's about the members of a fraternity house, but also everyone in their orbit. And so it's not all young men. It's like everyone who sort of circles the fraternity.
So were you in a fraternity?
Definitely not. I grew up in Amherst, Massachusetts, which is where the book takes place, right near what was then known as Greek Row.
Okay.
And if you're in high school, you know, you can go to those parties. You know, they sort of spill out of the houses, and you really see them. And they were kind of a despised group in Amherst, where I grew up. Like I was in a band in high school, like a punk band, and like I remember my bass player like leaning his entire torso out the window as we drove by and shouting "Jock Gestapo" at the frat boys as we passed, and then, you know, shouting back like, you know, like, what do you mean? Like, why are you saying that? And sort of being fascinated, you know, by these guys who were so villainized by everyone I knew. And yeah, you could go into the parties at that time, and it was actually where I saw some of my first shows. You know, were bands playing house parties at UMass. And so I went to a college that didn't have any fraternities, but you know, had that early exposure.
Right. Is the eternal conflict between the townies and the local students.
Yeah.
I suppose exacerbated by the fraternity culture.
Yeah, but you know, I'll tell you, it was actually teaching undergrads that I learned a lot of the best stories. Like, it wasn't just stuff I picked up in Amherst. It was when I was teaching creative writing to 20-year-olds, that they would come into my office hours and tell me amazing, sad, beautiful, funny stories that were happening in their real lives. And it was actually just a real lesson in how important it is to have your subjects trust you. That if people really feel like you'll respect their story and write about them sympathetically, they'll really let you into their lives.
And that's a lesson that applies equally, I imagine, to nonfiction and fiction.
Very much so. And I would say that my training in journalism was very helpful. That I knew how to just kind of be quiet and ask questions. And I think for anyone who wants to research a certain subculture, like, I don't know whether, you know, obviously for you it won't be frat boys out there, but whatever historical time you're interested in or living person you want to interview, one of the most important lessons that you learn as a journalist is don't try to blend in. Like, don't try to act like a frat boy if you're going to interview a frat boy. Don't try to act like a punk rocker if you're going to interview a punk rocker or whoever. Or a Russian soldier or whoever you're interviewing. Don't try to impersonate them or pretend that you're one of them, as you would if you were, say, a spy going undercover. The way to do it is to be absolutely clear about your outsider status and totally neutral and unashamed of it, and just say, hey, you know, I'm an alien from another planet. You know, I bear you no ill will. I'm interested in you. You know, explain your world to me. And that's actually a much better position from which to gain an understanding, and more respectful than like, I'm trying to make you think I'm one of you, you know?
Right.
And that was a really important lesson I learned from being a reporter when I was young.
But don't you at some point, regardless of whether you're writing, I mean, straight up reporting is one thing, but regardless of whether you're writing, say, a profile for a magazine or writing a piece of fiction that's based on personal experiences that you've had, don't you at some point have to render some kind of judgment? I mean, I keep thinking of that line from Janet Malcolm, you know, where she says, like, any journalist that thinks for, you know, that reflects seriously upon what we do for a living knows that we are all monsters, something like that.
Yeah.
I mean, do you agree with that?
To some degree, you know, I think that there is, in journalism, a necessary willingness to portray your subjects in a way that your subjects would find highly distasteful. But I think that's not necessarily monstrous, for one thing. I mean, I think if you're reporting on government, for example, then like a kind of oppositional or skeptical role is appropriate for the press. You know,
Absolutely.
Public figures, you know, accept that when they become public figures, especially if they're politicians, that their deeds are going to be exposed. And you know, I also have done journalism, or did journalism when I was young, that I came to feel ashamed of very quickly after I'd done it. And I think what's tough about being a magazine reporter is, or a newspaper reporter, is you have to take what assignments your editors give you if you're on staff. You don't get to make those ethical calls on your own. But Janet Malcolm's a great journalist, and so I contradict her at my peril, but I actually think that a lot of reporters are extremely ethical about what they do. And an interesting example, is that there are profile writers at the New Yorker who will, criticize other profiles in the New Yorker for not being ethical enough. And there are also profile writers at the New Yorker and other places who, if they, accept a profile assignment and find themselves hating their subject, will ask to be taken off of it. And Janet Malcolm is clearly of a different class. It's okay for her to hate her subject.
Right. I mean,
in fact, it might be helpful.
It reminds me of book reviewing. You know, when I started out, that was one of my many freelance jobs. I had regular book review columns in a number of genre publications. Mm-hmm. And at first, I dove into it with zeal as a writer, and maybe even more a writer and critic, maybe even more than a book reviewer. And I took a real pleasure in kind of skewering what I considered to be the weaknesses of the books and the writers and the publishers that publish drivel like that. But like you said, I came to be ashamed of that kind of writing. It was a wisdom I had to learn, unfortunately, at the expense of other people. But there is no pleasure in that ultimately, and no sense of real accomplishment, because I guess I came to realize that pretty much every writer is doing the best that they can.
I mean, I think that's true. I think the very greatest journalists are able to write about people as if they were characters in a great novel, which is to say they know them so well that they can show them as deeply flawed and making serious mistakes.
That makes me think of somebody like Robert Caro. I mean, that seems to be,
Yeah, or from an even more merciful slant, like Rachel Aviv, you know what I mean? Like people who are willing to say this person seriously misstepped, they were seriously delusional. But that, writing about them lovingly is about being close enough to them that you can see their great flaws and their great failures, even their moral failures, and still treat them with respect and warmth.
Right.
And I guess the person I think about a lot is Faulkner, because Faulkner knew that the Deep South, when he grew up in it, was in many ways, or at least certainly politically, a horrifying place. He was no fool, and he knew that lynchings were happening. He didn't shy away from describing them. He knew that terrible racial prejudice was ruling the way people were treated, and also in some sense loved his neighbors and his town. And he made plenty of mistakes in the way he wrote about the South, and many novels and stories that contain terribly racist passages that should never be forgiven. But he also tried to show how reprehensible the people who lived around him could be, and also to love them. And even though he failed to strike that balance many times, I still think about his attempt to do it.
Absolutely.
In my nonfiction.
Yeah, I'm a big admirer of Faulkner for many reasons, although I want to acknowledge all of his various shortcomings.
Yeah.
But at a certain level, of greatness, I guess, some stuff falls away and some stuff endures. And I think about somebody like Toni Morrison, who would have every reason to despise Faulkner, at least on an artistic level, recognized his achievements and accorded him the mutual recognition of one giant to another. And here's, speaking of giants, here's my co-host, Melissa Hart.
Hi, I'm sorry I'm late.
That's all right. Thanks. I'm glad you could make it. And Melissa, this is our guest, Benjamin Nugent.
Hi, Benjamin. It's good to meet you.
Yeah, good to meet you too. Thanks for having me.
We were talking a little bit about journalism, and you are a journalist as well. So we were talking about the ethics of journalism, of kind of what do you owe to your subject and what do you owe to your readers and things like that.
Wow, that's a big topic.
Hey man, it got heavy right away.
No kidding. Well, catch me up. What I miss?
Well, actually, I think we're going to move beyond that at this point. Now that you're here, I think we should talk a little bit about our respective programs, because SNHU is a bit unusual in that it has an online MFA, and I think it's one of the only institutions in the country that does have an all online MFA. Then it has a low residency MFA, which Ben is the director of the Mountainview MFA. And then it also has kind of substantial creative writing program on the MA side, at least online. I don't know about on campus. So there's actually quite a lot of support for creative writing at SNHU. So tell us a little bit about Mountainview, Ben, and how you came there, and anything else about the program.
Sure. So what low residency means, for those of you who aren't familiar, is we get together in person for a week every 6 months. And during that time, there's some practical things about it. We have agents come up to residency, and some of our students have gotten agents that way. And it's good for people to meet each other and, be able to talk over their goals with their faculty in person. But I would say the most important aspect of it is it just gives us a little bit of that moment in a peer workshop where you can feel the room reach a certain consensus about something you've written. What I always treasure are the moments where someone came in thinking that the important thing about a story they'd written was passage A that they had spent, a week on or whatever, and didn't think that much about passage B that they spent 5 minutes on, and everyone clearly loves passage B, and they can feel the warmth in the room and the excitement. And you can see someone's instincts being like reconfigured right in front of you. And that's exciting to me. So we do that, and then we're very one-on-one. Students meet with their mentor at residency and discuss their goals for the coming 6 months, and then they're back and forth with that one faculty member for the next 6 months. So if we match you with the right person, it works great. If we mess up and match you with the wrong person, it's utterly catastrophic. And so what I always tell people who are thinking about a low-res MFA program is it's generally either great or terrible depending on who you're matched with. So you should only ever do a low-res where people are really, really careful about placing students with the right faculty members, and that there's a big enough faculty that you can find your faculty soulmate, as it were, your aesthetic match, because man, is it not going to work if you're trying to write Dune and they think you should be writing Brideshead Revisited, and we work to avoid that. And it's very different in that it's all, students send 30 pages during the semester to the faculty mentor. The mentor writes them a 6-page letter, and then they talk about it. And so it's very different from what you guys do, which sounds just really cool too, which is asynchronous online classes, which I don't know that much about, but it sounds like you probably get a lot of written feedback from your peers, which is cool. And,
we do.
It's a different thing. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, we use a kind of a online based software called Annotate, and the students can upload their submissions into Annotate, which allows for line by line editing or comment by their by their peers in the workshop. So one manuscript will have many different students adding comments on it, and there's room in the comments field for students to respond to each other. So somebody can make a comment on a comment, in other words. So that's very helpful. But I do think there's the in-person workshops. I mean, I went to many of them myself in my undergrad and graduate careers, and there is something, I think, that to be completely honest with you, an online program struggles to make manifest for its students that sense of connection that you just described, of being in a room when something shifts and a new understanding of a work of art comes into existence. That's super exciting. And I think that still happens in our program, but it's less visible or less tangible, maybe somehow, at least in the moment.
But yeah, that sounds really cool. I guess it would be it would be fun. Well, at least it'd be fun if people liked your story. Like grow in a particular note. It might also be fun if people disagreed about your story. I can imagine like seeing a controversy happen about a particular passage, and that being kind of cool.
Yeah, I mean, there are disagreements, and all of course collegially presented. One other difference between our programs is that our program is one that's focused on genre, specifically in popular fiction, whereas your program is more of a traditional, I guess, MFA, in that its focuses on literary fiction, but also beyond that, on poetry, I believe, or does it have poetry?
We don't have poetry.
You have nonfiction, though, don't you?
We have nonfiction. Yeah, we have fiction, nonfiction, and occasionally a playwright. That's our job.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, and I love poetry, but I'm not qualified to teach it or select poetry faculty. But yeah, it's true. We do have students who write plenty of stories that are arguably or definitely science fiction or other genres, but they tend to be where those genres intersect with what's sometimes called literary fiction.
Right. That's kind of slipstream, so-called slipstream work.
Oh, okay. I didn't know that term, but that's cool. Yeah. And so we know very little about the online worlds that grow up around genre, and I think you guys are much more immersed in that, which is something that really interests me, and something I've never explored. But we're more traditional. It's more the traditional publishing world that we cater to.
And it's kind of funny, I think, because at one point, there were just the traditional Iowa-like creative writing workshops, and then low-res programs like Mountainview came along, and they were looked upon with kind of suspicion, and they were even looked down upon by those in the traditional programs. And then now online only MFAs are coming along, and I don't mean to imply at all that you're looking down upon us. It's just interesting that there's this progression that seems to be making the workshop experience more and more accessible to a wider range of people, because obviously the low-res model is built for people who are they have a job. They can't get away for 2 years to exclusively reside in a workshop environment. They do it for 6 weeks, and then our program is more accessible still because it is is available to people who can't even get away for 6 weeks, or who are otherwise just have obligations that just don't permit a more traditional standard. Now, I don't know what will come after the online only workshop. I feel certain something will, because it just seems like it's broadening in terms of access continually.
Yeah, it's funny you say that about Iowa. My old teacher at Iowa, Sam Chang, also teaches at Warren Wilson, which is a low residency program. So if there was a snobbery, it's
gone now.
But,
I think it's absolutely gone at this point. It's just when the new inventions are first introduced, there's kind of like suspicion, and nobody knows exactly what to make of them.
I'm all for it. It's interesting. Even getting away for a week every 6 months, which is what we do, is not always easy for all of our students.
Right.
So I can really understand why there's a need for something else. Sure.
Yeah. I'm trying to think if there is any other aspect of our programs that we would. Do you have anything else that you would like to add about Mountain View?
Sure. Yeah. So one of the interesting things about our program is that we try to sort of offer people who have a story to tell, but have never really been in a community of writers, a new community, and our students tend to call it the bubble, which is to say, like, it's this magical bubble where everyone cares about books, and it's like this sort of alternative universe that a lot of them have never experienced, and a lot of our students sort of come to us in middle age, often after sometimes careers in the military, sometimes careers in medicine or these other sort of professions that tend to generate a lot of stories. And what we try to do is provide a kind of link between people who have lived very much like outside the literary world and the literary world. And so, I'm proud that our alumni have been Pulitzer finalists and Whiting Award winners, and have been named Barack Obama's 10 best books of 2021 writers and that kind of thing. But the reason we've been able to do it is because we've brought in people who had never had any contact with that world before. And so to me, that's kind of what we're all about, is sort of like being a gateway to the traditional publishing universe for people who have never been part of it before.
Yeah, I think that's really well said, and I recognize a lot of that in the online MFA too. The sense of finally being with people who should not just share the same interests but speak the same language. I remember for me it was kind of mind-blowing to encounter a group of people who cared about words in the same way that I did, because that was something that was fairly rare until I got into until after college, frankly, when I really began pursuing being a writer.
I wonder about your program, if you found this that I found, is that there are some people who are really shy except when everything is in text only. I wonder if on Annotate those people are really able to kind of come through in a way they wouldn't in a synchronous, even an online synchronous discussion like this, let alone one in person, that, that existing as a text-only entity gives them a kind of ness that they don't have in other mediums.
What do you think about that, Melissa?
Yeah, I think so. I've witnessed this firsthand in my thesis classes. Students I've never heard from suddenly come to life on Annotate with brilliant suggestions. And yeah, that's wonderful to see. Somebody in the chat asked if we might do a quick breakout room just so students could get to know each other just a bit. Is that appropriate today, Paul?
I guess I mean, I don't see anything against it. I guess I can try a breakout room. Who would like to go into the breakout room?
I wonder how many people are here. I wondered if we might if it would be possible to do like 5 or 7 minutes of 3 breakout rooms, just so small groups could get to know each other a
bit. Hey, how did that work? I couldn't go into any of the rooms, so.
Okay, that's cool.
That was thrilling.
Was it fun?
Yeah, it was super fun.
Did you guys talk about me while I was out here in the lobby?
We talked about your background. What is going on back there? What is in the plexiglass case?
Oh, that's I don't know, but I was telling Ben earlier that my guess is that this is Marcel Proust's writing room. It's lined with cork. It's actually it's the actual room he wrote in, which was sold to a museum in Paris and reassembled. You can visit it if you like. It's an incredible museum, and this is just one amazing part of it. But anyway, he was a kind of an invalid, as we all know, and had asthmatic problems, and so my guess is that this is some kind of weird infuser. He used to smoke like cigarettes that were especially made for asthmatics. So I mean, like as a cure for asthma, that was what was prescribed: cigarettes.
Okay.
So science has come a long way.
And his brother was a doctor, right? Like an illustrious doctor.
Oh, was he? That I didn't know.
I think so.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's funny. All right, so let's move on to the next stage of our talk. I'm very, very interested in this, and then we'll throw it open for questions. And by the way, you can post your questions in the chat at any time, and Melissa will keep track of them, and I'll try to keep an eye on them too. But anyway, I live in Brooklyn on 4th Avenue and 36th Street, right next to a express subway stop that just happens to be the subway stop that the subway shootings in New York of a couple of weeks ago took place in. And I have to say, I was in New York on 9/11 in my apartment in the East Village. And not since 9/11 did I see at least in this particular area of Brooklyn, did I see that intensity of like police response and fire department response and like helicopters everywhere and news people just everywhere. And it really gave me kind of like a unpleasant deja vu experience. I mean, it was bad on it in its own right, but it also conjured up all of these, memories and associations of a very unfortunate time in the history of the city and this country. But anyway, and kind of beside the point, it's interesting to me also how quickly that event has now faded from like the newspapers, from the TV stations. It's just gone. I saw the other day, by the way, that the perpetrator, the alleged shooter, was just I guess he was just arraigned, or some legal happening took place, and it was buried on, like, page 10 of the New York Times. It didn't even merit the front page anymore. Obviously, a lot of other stuff is going on, but it was interesting to me how quickly it faded from our immediate consciousness. But the reason I wanted to talk about it was because it seemed like a kind of event that might last longer in our consciousness, and it made me think about how do writers deal with events like that, which cast such a large and immediate shadow. And 9/11 is obviously probably the archetype of events like that in recent memory. What is the obligation of a creative writer, of a fiction writer? I mean, obviously a journalist can go out and report on it right away, but if you try to write a story, say, about the subway shooter, within the next week, you might very well be told, oh, it's too soon. It's too soon for something like that for any number of reasons. So I'm very curious to know, Melissa and Ben, what do you think? What is the obligation of the creative writer in a faced with an event like that?
Do you want to go first, Melissa?
No, I want to think about that.
It's too soon.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, I'll start. I think, what a journalist does is tell you the most immediately important who, what, where, how, why of a situation, right? That's a journalist's job, is to give you the most absolutely central, stripped down, essential series of events that happened. And I think what fiction writers generally do is then kind of look at what got left out of that story, what people haven't all heard already. What's the other shadow side of that no one heard? And sometimes it's the perspective of the villains, so to speak. Sometimes it's the perspective of people who are quote unquote minor characters in the story. I really love Mavis Gallant's short stories about World War II, because they're about the stories of people in World War II who you've never heard before. It's never occurred to you. But they're based on really real things. Like The Late Homecomer is a story about like a poor German boy who joins the Hitler Youth when he's like 7 years old and barely knows what it is, and winds up a teenage soldier in the war and getting taken prisoner by the French. And there was this program I didn't know about in France where it was like, well, how are we going to repair after the war? And it was, well, we've got these German prisoners. Maybe we'll keep them around and help them. They'll help us repair the country. and so this guy, doesn't get to go back to Berlin where he's from for like 5 years after the war.
Wow.
He's this thing really happened where there were these young German boys who had these, uniforms on that said like PG on the back for like, prisoner, guerre, or whatever. And they were just kind of embedded in families, like foreign exchange students. And basically,
had absolutely no idea.
Yeah, it's incredible. And her story is about that. It's like that's not the essential story of World War II. It's on the margins of World War II.
Right.
And to me, that's a great thing for fiction writers to do.
And then I guess, oh, go ahead, Paul.
I was just going to say, it sounds like somebody has a mic on. If you could turn it off, everyone except our presenters, I'd appreciate it. Thank you. Go ahead, Melissa.
Yeah, I want to speak also to creative nonfiction, which I think is an interesting way to approach current events. I write a lot of social commentary for newspapers and magazines when I'm not writing fiction, and that's a pretty wonderful way of, first of all, not having to be, a hard facts journalist, but also to be able to make a personal connection to a major news story, and weave in that personal connection with that news story to show patterns that may have been repeated over time, to really just put a humanizing face on a current news story, if that makes sense. And so lots and lots of major newspapers reserve a section of their commentary pages every day for that type of creative nonfiction op-ed piece. So that's just one more way of approaching what you're talking about, Paul.
Mm-hmm. Can you give an example of something that you did along those lines?
All I can think of is something that I wrote a long time ago when the very first model with Down syndrome walked the catwalk in New York Fashion Week about 5 years ago. I jumped on that because my younger brother has Down syndrome, and he's had a subscription to GQ and a crush on Tom Cruise for about 20 years, and has always looked to GQ as his kind of gold standard of handsomeness. And so I was able to weave in his story and my story with what that means to the community of people with Down syndrome and their caregivers and friends, and what it means to the world of fashion, if that makes sense.
Yeah. And what's interesting about that, or there are many things interesting about that, but what strikes me about it is that, okay, there is an example of you taking a current event, tying it into your own personal history, and writing a piece of creative nonfiction. You also have a middle grade book that is just coming out that is also in sort of grew out of or incorporates elements of your personal, your relationship with your brother and things like that. So the same seed kind of germinated in different ways, depending on whether you decided to take a fiction or a nonfiction approach. Well, what was the difference?
Oh, in the approach?
Well, not so much in the approach as what made you decide. I mean, obviously the current event kind of happened and then it sparked a response, but you still had more to say about the subject, and you decided, well, fiction is now the way to say what I have to say.
Well, I am a big fan of spinning one topic in as many different ways as possible to maximize efficiency and time and my research. So I actually just wrote for the Washington Post about 3 young adults who have Down syndrome. And one is an entrepreneur, and one is the first person with Down syndrome to complete an Ironman.
Oh, wow.
And another is a model and a spokesperson for the community. And so I'm not done. I just, this particular demographic doesn't get enough press. So any way that I can help people to understand this demographic, whether it's middle grade fiction or a journalistic piece, the better. Yeah. That didn't really answer your question, Paul.
Yes, it did. Thank you. It did. Of course, it answered my question. But, I'm also thinking about, because the other thing that occurred to me when I was thinking about this topic before our chat tonight was the election of Donald Trump. And, here's another kind of like, intrusion of cold, hard reality into the imaginative life of like creative writers, and I don't, obviously it was a cold, hard intrusion into many other people's lives too. But I'm thinking of like William Gibson, the speculative fiction writer who had a novel completed, and I believe it was with his publisher, and Trump was elected, and he was like, I have to change everything in my novel now. I cannot write that this novel cannot be published under my name anymore because it is not responsive to this event that just happened. So he took his novel back and rewrote it because he felt that otherwise it would be a fundamentally dishonest novel in a way that it wasn't just a day before. I mean, I just find that fascinating. I don't have a question to ask about it. I'm just intrigued by it.
That's really interesting because I think sometimes people suppose that science fiction novels are about the future, and that's sort of makes a case that they're about the present.
Well, that's Gibson's famous saying is that, science fiction is not about the future. It's about the present. And I agree with him. Well, I mean, everything we write is about the present, even if we're writing something that's set, back in Neanderthal times, like Kim Stanley Robinson, another great speculative fiction writer, has done. He's writing about, today. And that's why, I mean, one of my little hobby horses is, oftentimes people think of speculative fiction as I read science fiction to escape. Well, yes, but no, because you're really reading it to engage in some way with things that you can engage with, on a more immediate level. Not that, and I don't mean to imply any kind of judgment to that. It's just, it's the way that people are wired differently. And I think that's why some of us gravitate towards speculative fiction and others do not.
Yeah, so I've often wondered about the different ways people come to be moved by literature. And it seems to me like one way is for the world you've created to have a kind of metaphorical relationship to the present, which I think is maybe something that Gibson is interested in doing. And then another way to sort of like help people see things anew and therefore move them is to offer a perspective that they've never considered before. And there are some writers who are all about like finding that new perspective on the present. And then there are other writers who are about creating an elaborate, beautiful metaphor for the present.
Well, that's really interesting because often you hear, well, what's the difference between literary fiction and genre fiction? How do you sum up that difference? Do you think that is one definition of the difference?
That's a really good question. I don't know. It's such a thorny question. What non-realistic fiction should be considered genre and what should be considered literature? You know what I mean? Or should that exist? Or I hesitate to wade into those waters. But
I don't blame you.
but perhaps we could say that the gesture or technique of establishing an alternative world is perhaps an effort to establish a metaphor for the present, whereas the new perspective is one that hopes to defamiliarize the present in a different way. But that the goals of both are defamiliarization. Well,
that's super interesting that you use that word, which I'm sure was very intentional. I'm of course blanking on the name of the Russian literary critic that was all about defamiliarization, but that was his take on speculative fiction and science fiction in particular, and horror and genres like that. Was all about defamiliarizing the familiar. And I think it's something you see especially in certain types of horror, like the turn of the screw is a great example of that from early in the last century. Yeah, let's hear it for defamiliarization, and it's a cool word anyway.
Yeah.
Well, we're almost at the end of our time, so I'm going to throw things open to, and I apologize for doing it so late, but I was really caught up in our conversation. What questions anyone in the audience cares to throw at us, we will do our best to answer. And you can just type them right in the chat.
I'm going to type something to Shelley. I don't know how to just direct it to Shelley, so there it is.
That's fine.
We were having a great chat in that breakout room once we figured out how to see each other.
Well, that's good. I'm going to talk to you about that later because maybe this is something we can incorporate in future chats.
I think it'd be fun.
I just have no idea how it works. But I better learn fast because you mentioned that you have agents up and to the Mountainview for students to interact with, and we're starting to do that now. We have in about 2 weeks we have a kind of a pitch session set up that will take place in this Teams environment for thesis students where they'll be able to pitch their novels to agents in breakout rooms. So I definitely have to figure out how that works.
I had a great time in my breakout room. I learned about I think it was a Doberman puppy who likes to help you at one of your Lynn's. Yeah, there she is. Hey, Lynn. Students while she writes.
That's great.
Yeah.
Matt, the answer is no, and the reason is that it's kind of a private exchange between the agent and the student. Anything can happen in those sessions. There might be an offer made, there might be a request to see a full manuscript, and for that reason, we're not going to record it.
Sounds exciting.
Yeah, I can't wait.
Time in the breakout room.
Yeah, I can't wait. It's going to be a lot of fun.
Hmm.
Well, all right, everyone. On that note, I am going to bring our chat to a close. I want to thank Ben Nugent at the Mountainview for joining us. This was really great, and I'm sure I'll be seeing you around our neighborhood.
Yeah, I look forward to it, and really nice to meet you, Melissa.
Yeah, you as well, Ben. Thank you.
And all the rest of you. Thanks so much for having me here. It was really fun.
Yeah, you're welcome. And Melissa, we will see you next time.
Yep, sounds good. Thanks,
all right.
everybody.
All right. Bye, everybody.
Bye.